collaboration with the Cyprus Mail. This is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Charalambous.
Coming up this week, academics gather on Othello's Island for a conference on medieval and Renaissance art and culture.
So they spun a narrative that reached from the Crusades to the present of colonization in the 19th century, as if there had not been intervening centuries where the places had been owned by different people.
It's 400 years since he died, but Shakespeare Lives in 2016.
Oh, I haven't slept a wink, or oh, she's got a heart of gold. All of these sayings and many, many more were actually first written by Shakespeare, either in his plays or, of course, in his sonnets.
Techies team up with artists for the culture shift.
It's bringing together people from the culture sector and the arts sector in Cyprus, and entrepreneurship as well as innovative ideas, technology, to find a way how to solve different challenges.
And more people across the world die from contaminated water than from all the violence and wars put together. We'll talk to the inventor of a simple device that could change that.
The hidden killer very often is compounds like arsenic, like fluoride, chrome-6, heavy metals that are commonly found in water. And if people need help, and this is one way that we can help these people.
The fourth annual conference on medieval and Renaissance art, literature and history started yesterday in Nicosia at the CVAR. It continues until the 20th of March, and it's attracting a large number of academic researchers from all over the world. It includes talks on topics like the impact of climate change on medieval Icelandic storytelling and the Italian origin of tarot cards. There are lots and lots of speakers. We'll tell you later where you can find out who's going to be there and what they'll be talking about. But one of the keynote speakers this evening is going to be Dr. Astrid Svensson of Brunel University. She'll be talking at 7 p.m. on the use of medieval history by British and French colonial governments in the Mediterranean and the Middle East. She joins us now. Astrid, you don't really think of colonial governments making use of medieval history. So what do you mean by that title?
I mean how they use them for policy, how they use them for identity building. But you're absolutely right. Normally we don't think about it, and we don't really see it when we visit a lot of medieval sites.
Does it mean that throughout the years colonial governments have, in a sense, relied on the history of the areas that they've colonized to maybe give them an insight into what they need to know to do it properly?
In part, it's learning about the history and it's becoming familiar with the customs. But in the cases that I will be talking about, in Cyprus, in Malta, in Rhodes, and in the Middle East, the case was a little bit more complicated because the colonialists came with certain ideas already about these medieval buildings because they thought they were theirs. They were French, they were British, they were Italian, they were German, rather than Cypriot, Maltese, Syrian, or Greek, for example.
So what effect did that have on their policy making?
It had different effects. Very often it gave them a feeling of returning to lands that they had already possessed. So they spun a narrative that reached from the Crusades to the present of colonization in the 19th century, as if there had not been intervening centuries where the places had been owned by different people.
But in the case of Cyprus, for example, we had a long period of the Venetians, who probably shared some architectural and cultural, perhaps, ideas with the British or the French. They were Europeans, after all.
This is what we think now, and this is what the 18th century thought. The 18th century thought about this architecture as pan-European, very often as Christian. And now we also think about it as being representative of all the different influences in Europe and very much as very hybrid architectures. But in the 19th century, we have a process of nationalization. The British thought the island was British because Richard the Lionheart had been here. The French thought it was French because of the Lusignan dynasty. And the Italians thought it was Italian because of the Venetians. So they kind of tried to restore buildings very often in a way that would remove the traces of other European powers and sometimes also later Arab or Ottoman additions.
So what would we call the buildings that we see now that have those labels on them?
I think now we would probably stick to medieval and not label them in particular national terms, because we're more aware that they are actually built by different people, used by different people, and that they're really hybrid in nature.
And what about things like the building materials? I mean, if you look at a building, can you tell from the materials it's made from, as well as from the shapes and the architecture, what it probably originally was?
You can tell from the building materials and you can tell from the additions that have been made. So, for example, if you have a minaret on top of a cathedral, you can see that there's a change taking place, but you don't necessarily always can tell exactly at which period this has been made. So we need written documents as well as the architectural record for this.
So that's part of what you'll be covering, but I'm sure there's much more. What else will you be telling people in your talk?
I will also talk about the local interactions and sort of the human interaction that took place around these buildings, because they are the very grand policies that try to tell people a particular narrative about colonialism or nationalism, but then there are also the interactions between an architect who wants to restore and a shepherd who might be living in an abandoned abbey, or between a guardian and an imperialist. So there are a lot of human stories that tell us a lot about how intercultural interactions, both in cooperative forms, but also in terms of dominance and subversion, actually functioned.
You mentioned Malta right at the beginning, and of course both Cyprus and Malta are islands. Does that have any impact on the way the things you're talking about evolve? Because that insularity must to some degree, in a sense, protect some of these things.
I think it's no coincidence that the main places I'm looking at are islands. In part it is because the Knights Hospitallers moved from one island to another, having to leave the Holy Land, going to Cyprus, to Rhodes, to Malta. So I'm following their story kind of in reverse chronological orders. But it also means, because these are relatively small places, that these heritages are relatively important and probably more dominant both in the memory and in the architecture than they're often on the mainland in Europe.
Now, you're talking at the Othello conference, in a sense, isn't it? Othello's Island, it's called. What is the Shakespearean connection, if any, to what you're talking about?
That is a very good question. I think the Shakespearean connection is more in the imagination, in the sense that Shakespeare was fascinated by the history of the island, and that was one of the reasons why he set Othello here. But there's also a connection in how the British would think of Cyprus as a British island by connecting the history of one of their medieval kings to that of their greatest bard.
Well, that's just some of what Dr. Astrid Svensson of Brunel University will be talking about tonight at 7 p.m. on the use of medieval history by British and French colonial governments in the Mediterranean and in the Middle East. And you can get the full programme of the conference, Othello's Island, if you go to www.othellosisland.org.
You can subscribe to the Cyprus News Digest on iTunes for free and get the program downloaded to your phone or tablet so you can listen anytime, anywhere.
It's the 400th anniversary this year of the death of William Shakespeare, and coming together for a series of events here in Cyprus are the British Council and the British High Commission. They're going to be marking the occasion with a series of events called Shakespeare Lives. Joining us from the British Council is Sandra Hamrouni, and from the British High Commission, Alex Needham. Alex, first for you, because it's a little unusual, is it not, for the British High Commission to be involved in cultural events here?
It is. I mean, the Foreign Office doesn't have an objective to do cultural events generally. Where we can, we try to join up with the British Council to do them, but in the past few years, it hasn't been one of our priorities.
So why get involved in this one?
Well, for the UK, the 400th anniversary of Shakespeare's death is considered to be one of the biggest public diplomacy opportunities we have had since the London 2012 Olympics. Obviously, Shakespeare is our greatest writer and possibly one of the world's greatest writers, and his legacy touches all sorts of areas.
So it's really an opportunity to, in a sense, bring British culture to wherever you happen to be represented in the world.
Exactly, to a wider audience, and obviously we're also celebrating through that the English language as well.
And let's come to you and the British Council, if we may, Sandra, because you said at the introductory speech that a lot of the language that we use today actually was penned by William Shakespeare, and most of us probably don't know that. It's quite fascinating.
Yes, I think that's absolutely true. And even myself, when I was reading up on Shakespeare and on Othello and other kinds of work that he's done, it was quite interesting that many of the things that we say today, which we think are absolutely current, which we think are from contemporary society, were actually first penned by William Shakespeare. Just a couple of examples. He vanished into thin air. Or knock knock, who's there? Which of course is a phrase used in many jokes, even today when I was a child, but also nowadays. Oh, I haven't slept a wink. Or, oh, she's got a heart of gold. All of these sayings and many, many more were actually first written by Shakespeare, either in his plays or, of course, in his sonnets.
And what events have you got coming up in terms of people getting the chance to see some Shakespeare here in Cyprus? Because I think you've got, is it 3 or 4 events?
The first event was on the 16th of March, 2 events actually. One was at the Goethe Institute for schools, for university and school students, seeing a showing of Othello, which of course is on the syllabus for many exams, and a second showing of Othello at Pantheon Cinema, and followed by a talk by Dr. Philippi, who is a professor from Kingston University. And then, following that, we are also, both British High Commission and British Council are supporting the National Theatre Live performance of As You Like It at the Thoc Theatre.
The Cyprus Theatre Organisation.
Yes.
And they're going to be showing that when?
As You Like It on the 29th of March.
I guess people for that one have to book. It's like going to the theatre at Thoc.
Yes, that will be paid as normal with tickets. The other events are free.
And what about the rest of the year? I know you can't do millions of things, but are there any plans, particularly within a school environment, since the British Council is so heavily involved with exams and schools here, are there plans to bring a little bit more Shakespeare perhaps later in the year?
We hope that over 2016 we will be, there will hopefully be a couple of more film events, possibly Hamlet. And also we're wanting to run some kind of competition which will involve young people, again from both communities, doing a workshop together and then producing dialogues, not performing dialogues, timed dialogues, and then there'll be a competition around these to choose the best performances.
All of these details, I guess, are going to be on the British Council website?
They'll be on the British Council website, and in addition on the website there are lots of free materials for teachers and learners in schools or in universities who are currently studying English literature, or of course who want to brush up their English or anything else to do with English or Shakespeare.
Or just get to know the works of the bard. Yeah. Shakespeare Lives in 2016, and he certainly will be doing just that in Cyprus. We've been talking to Sandra Hamrouni from the British Council and Alex Needham from the British High Commission in Cyprus.
Keep up to date with events in Cyprus and around the world with the Cyprus News Digest.
Culture Shift is an innovative hackathon that starts today and runs through until Sunday. It's being organised by the British Council and the British High Commission in Cyprus. And Natasha Apostolidou joins us to tell us all about it. All right, you better start by telling me what a hackathon is.
Hello. Rosie, thank you. A hackathon is when groups of people come together and use technology to bring out ideas on specific challenges or problems faced. In the case of the Culture Shift hackathon that is starting today, the teams will be working on challenges on the cultural sector of Cyprus.
When you say challenges, what sort of things do you mean?
For example, one of the challenges could be that a village quite far away from the city has no access to museums, people who live in the village, and an idea could be that the museums are digital in order for them to have this access with culture and things like that. Another one, of course, could be from the actual culture sector, so a museum having a problem or a challenge that the teams will be working into solving. So it's bringing together people from the cultural sector and the arts sector in Cyprus, and entrepreneurship as well as innovative ideas, technology, to find a way how to solve different challenges.
Now, if they come up, these teams, with ideas that do solve some of the problems, correct me if I'm wrong, I think the problems are actually going to be put forward by members of the public. So does it mean that somebody in an outlying village can, go online and say, well, we have a problem, we haven't got any music, or we haven't got any museums, help us? If that happens, where do they go to put their problem up, and how do they find out whether it's been solved?
Exactly, yes. The problems are actually being suggested by the people. The challenges, they can go online on the website of the British Council, which is www.britishcouncil.com.cy, click on events, click on the Culture Shift programme, and there they can find links into submitting the challenges. They can also find links into registering, but of course it's too late now. And these challenges are the ones that are being worked by the teams.
And where do the teams come from? You said that people have obviously had to register, but you've got people coming from abroad as well as Cypriots.
Well, actually, the people who will be participating are purely Cypriots. They are from both communities of Cyprus. So we will have buses to accommodate the Turkish Cypriot coming into the venue, which is the Capital Impact venue. But we're having people from abroad, such as Snook, who is actually organising the whole thing, has organised Culture Shift for the British Council in many other countries before. They are Glasgow-based, and we are organising this in partnership also with Google, who will be providing a prize for the winning team.
What prize?
Yeah, the prize is a great experience for people who will be winning. It's going to the YouTube event of Google for free.
Well, there you are. That is the Culture Shift event starting today, running through until Sunday the 20th. And if you want to find out more, visit the British Council's website, where doubtless once the event finishes, they will be putting up details of how all these problems were solved.
Get in touch with the Cyprus News Digest by emailing cyprusnewsdigest@gmail.com.
It's a shocking fact that more people across the world die as a result of polluted water than are killed by all forms of violence, including wars. The access to clean water depends, of course, very much on where in the world you are. But a group of people have come up with a brilliant idea which could solve the problem. It's called the desalinator, and William Janssen is here to join us and tell us all about it. William, how did the idea for the desalinator come about, and what actually does it do?
The idea originated from a trip to Thailand in the late 90s, where I, for the first time, coming from Holland where there is not very much sun, saw solar water heaters on people's roofs. And I was quite intrigued with these devices because they're very efficient in making water for your shower. But if you study them from a physical point of view, the scientists would say that actually the efficiency is quite low. The efficiency is actually shockingly low. And I was thinking in my head on how to take these devices and significantly raise the efficiency. That led me to the idea of replacing the black surface inside with a PV solar panel. which can work, which has been done actually. But the problem was that I didn't really know what to do with the energy. And finally I moved to the Emirates, to Dubai. And when I lived there, I saw the immense need for desalination. And I then thought, why? Maybe you could use the device of a solar heater to desalinate water. I just had to overcome a few problems. The water had to boil to be able to evaporate it. And I had to make sure that the water would condense. So I rejigged it in my head and I said, okay, we have to make sure that there is water warming up, that it will boil, that it will keep on boiling, that it will evaporate, and that we can condense it. All that into one compact device, nicely insulated and efficient and functional.
And you did make one eventually.
Yeah.
It's now available, I think, but you went through a process because, to begin with, I think I'm right in saying it was quite a big thing, and you wanted to make it more available to a wider number of people, so you needed to, in a sense, make it more compact and, of course, more affordable.
Yes. The big advantage of the basic idea was that the solar heater, which was the basis of the idea, is a relatively simple device. And what I thought was that if we could come up with a device that is relatively small and relatively manageable, can be carried by one or two people, then it could be made available to every family who is suffering from drought. And the ability to use flat sheet material like glass and like standardized components means that the device can be manufactured at a relatively low cost, and that means that it can be made available to relatively poor families who are living in this water crisis. And those two aspects together we have come now to a point where we want this year to start doing significant field trials in places like Kenya and India.
Now, when we talk about desalination, it means you have to have a source of saline water. Can this be used also with, let's say, dirty river water?
Yes, the device is basically functional for all sources of water because it doesn't filter the water, it actually evaporates. It separates the water molecules from all the rest. So it can be used with lake water, river water, but it can also be used, and this is very important to note, with well water. You mentioned in your introduction that people get sick from water, and many people actually drink well water that looks very clean. But very often there is a hidden killer inside that water. That could, of course, be bacteria and viruses and fungi, which we eliminate with our device.
How do you eliminate those?
But due to the boiling process and the evaporation,
that automatically kills any dangerous...
But they will also not be able to jump the evaporation barrier, so that makes it very difficult for a disease to jump through our device. Theoretically may be possible, but highly unlikely. But the hidden killer very often is compounds like arsenic, like fluoride, chrome-6, heavy metals that are commonly found in water. Some people have exposure only to acidic or alkaline water, and these people need help. And this is one way that we can help these people.
So let me get this right. Basically, once the machine is readily available to all and sundry, a family who can afford to buy it, as long as they have a source of water nearby, can, if you like, put the water through the desalinator and get how much clean water at the end of it?
So the functionality of the device is to provide enough water for a family of up to 5 to provide in their drinking and cooking needs. So one would say about 15 liters of water per day. Which is approximately one of these big blue bottles almost.
And which in drought-stricken areas of Africa is much more water than most of them ever use anyway.
Yes, one of the big problems in many affected areas is that people drink too little water. And drinking too little water has a negative effect on your stamina, and it affects their productivity. and they don't drink more because they simply have no more access to the water. So that again leads to disease. So there is really a lot can be achieved by just making water available to people.
So what's next? You're going to obviously roll this out at some point.
Yes.
But I presume that you're continuing with fine-tuning it as well.
Yes, that is very much a very important aspect of the process which we're in. We will start this summer with a project in Kenya, where we have found a region and a village where the groundwater is polluted with fluoride. And we're going to do a very specific rollout where we will provide 25 units to the school in the village. And we will give all the children in the village a water bottle, approximately 1.5 to 2 liter size bottle. And the bottle will have a red line around the middle of the bottle. And the children will be forced by the school to drink half the bottle during their school day. But the other half of the bottle they are allowed to bring home to their parents. Through that means we hope to achieve 2 goals. First of all, we hope that the children will share the water with their family, so that there will be an awareness in the family about the fact that the child is getting water at school. But secondly, we hope to see that the parents will notice that the child gets healthier, because the fluoride content in that region is 4 times the maximum allowed daily intake. So it's relatively high, and there's a lot of very bad health effects of that.
Where is it coming from, the fluoride?
It's naturally occurring in the ground. So there is not much you can do about that. The well water continuously contains fluoride. We then hope that the parents will become aware of this, and that the parents will try the water from the children, and that eventually more and more people in the village will have raised awareness about the fluoride problem. That is good for us. The children are growing up more healthy, and consequently we want to roll out a second launch of products which we will then make available to micro-entrepreneurs in the village who we will select, and they will use the device, and the deal is that for 1 year they are allowed to sell the water to the community at whichever price they want to charge for the water, and after 1 year they will have to start paying a small fee for the device on a weekly basis. But in the first year they'll get the device for free, and they will then further create awareness and availability of water in the village.
And presumably also perhaps that will encourage people who can afford to buy one of these.
That is the third step. So the third step is that we will then do a marketing campaign in the village with a microfinance organization, and we will then through microfinance, so without any upfront cost, make the units available for all the families.
How much do the units cost?
The units currently go for a price point of just under $500, and we hope to bring this price down through very efficient serial production.
It's a lot of money for people in villages in rural Africa. Is there any possibility that a smaller unit or something that's more affordable in order to spread its availability wider is in the pipeline?
A smaller device is being developed. So there the answer is yes. Another thing that we can do is continuously work on raising the efficiency. By that means we can reduce the cost per liter, which is the industry standard that is used to assess the efficiency of these kind of products. And what we can finally do is we can look at the competitive landscape. And what we see is that in villages where there is no water, so where people are dependent on other solutions, we see that people buy water from a water truck. Now, this is usually not a very nice gentleman who comes whenever he pleases and who asks relatively high amounts of money for the locals for buckets of water. And we have extrapolated how much this costs. And our price per liter is significantly lower than the water truck costs. And the water truck is a very polluted device. The truck has a lot of diesel fumes and all that kind of stuff, whereas our device is of course completely solar driven. So we see the problem for desalinator more in the upfront cost aspect and not so much in the running cost of the device.
And what about its lifespan? Because you talk about the price per litre, but over how many years is that?
So the PV panel has a lifespan of 20 years. We hope, of course, that the device will last that long. We do not use that for our calculations. We see the device having an economical lifespan of up to 10 years.
And the reaction of people who've seen this working in your test areas?
Well, we have wonderful, you can visit our website, there are a few videos. There are wonderfully enthusiastic and wonderfully upset people who say, why didn't you come earlier with the device? We've been cheated by the water truck driver for such a long time. But no, the people are very happy that they gain independence. That is the main reaction, is that they have for such a long time been dependent on others to foresee in their water needs, and that makes it difficult for them because the men are out making money and the lady of the house who spends the money is spending part of the hard-earned money on a water truck.
Or spending her day walking miles to a well to bring back a jar of water.
And for them to achieve a level of independence through the fact that they actually have a device in their own home, that they can control themselves, that is, as far as theirs, and that provides for them on a daily basis, that is a very great achievement to them.
Well, we've been talking to the mind behind the desolinator, William Janssen, and you can find out more if you go to desolinator.com. He's been in Cyprus to talk at the Climate Launchpad, which is, of course, as we've mentioned before on the programme, an event that deals with clean tech solutions. The desolinator is a winner. Well, that about wraps up this edition of the Cyprus News Digest. Many thanks for your company. Hope you'll join me next week. Till we meet again, take care and God bless. Bye-bye now.